everyone, welcome to Writers of the World. Today we're going to talk about living with secrets, a topic that some hesitate to cover, but it's healing to bring it out into the open because perhaps everyone has secrets on some level. The depth and breadth of our panelists' accomplishments could fill a book and would be worthy of its own discussion panel. However, because time is limited, we'll address the highlights. If you could each please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Carol Anderson, a life coach and a former organizational consultant. I'm the author of the award-winning memoir, You Can't Buy Love Like That, Growing Up Gay in the 60s. It's a book that offers hope to those seeking to live honestly and without fear.
Hi, I'm Deb Brandon. I'm the author of But My Brain Had Other Ideas, a memoir of recovery from brain injury. I started writing about my journey to help me understand my new post-injury life. And the project grew from a journal to an award-winning book.
Hi, my name is Dr. Veronica Slaughter. My book is titled Have You Seen These Children? It's a memoir that takes place between 1959 and 1963, the 4 years that we were taken and brought from the country I was born in, which is the Philippines, and brought to the United States by my American father, and running and hiding. Talk about secrets for 4 years.
My name is Ann Hamer. I'm the author of Writing Your Life, the Ultimate Guide to Telling Your Story. I teach memoir writing and self-publishing classes, and I have degrees from Oregon State, Loyola, and Oxford.
My name is Patty Sisco. I wrote another cheesy family newsletter, a memoir, under the pen name Elizabeth Silva. And in it, I contrast the cheesy family newsletters that I send out every holiday season with what really was going on in the family, which in many cases was very dark and depressing.
Hi, I'm Diane McPhail. I'm an artist, a writer, a therapist, a minister. My debut novel, The Abolitionist's Daughter, deals with 3 extraordinary women and their survival of traumatic times, and it has gathered rave reviews. And I live and write in a restored grist mill in Highlands, North Carolina. I still have all the machinery in it.
Welcome, everyone. So the first question is, with regards to your own life or relating to your book, can you tell us about the impact that living with secrets can have?
Well, if you look at descriptions of books, almost, I'd say 60% of them that you look at are going to say, here's the protagonist, and the protagonist goes somewhere and finds this and these deep secrets that no one knew are revealed and changes everything. Well, my book, The Abolitionist's Daughter, there are many secrets in it, but it came to me in exactly the way that is described in a lot of those descriptions of books. I grew up with this story. I heard it all my life. I made trips with my family to the ghost town, which was really this abandoned graveyard. I heard this horrendous story over and over, but I never knew it had anything whatsoever to do with me. And in my middle adulthood, I needed to know something about my mother, who had died after I was born. I was 9 weeks old. And I went to visit my uncle, and he was showing me old photographs and newspaper articles. And there was this story of Bloody Greensboro and this violent incident that happened and that affected really all of these women. And I said to him, Ralph, I just have to stop you. I have to ask you, this story has bothered me always. This woman who lived through all this. And he said, which woman? And I said, this young woman who had to cut her son out of this tree. And he said, Diane, that's your great-grandmother.
Oh,
And there was my secret that I had never known.
My whole book, my whole memoir was about my secret of being gay. And what I've come to understand about secrets, I think, is that all of them are driven by fear. Fear that you can lose your family, fear you'll lose your friends, fear that people won't understand why you're keeping that secret. And I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian family, and so that was not a good match for being gay. So the necessity to keep a secret felt very essential at that period of time. It was also a time in our culture where being gay was against the law. It was against all the cultural norms. There was a lot of hostility against gay people at that time. So my fears were well-founded. They weren't sort of fantasy fears. And the potential consequences that could occur as a result of people knowing were very serious. People lost their apartments. Women who were gay lost their children. Many people lost their friends or family members. So I think the major impact of keeping that secret in my life was really losing my ability to live an authentic life. I spent a lot of time pretending I was straight and that I was with men when I was with women. I pretended that the person I lived with was just my roommate and not my lover. I pretended that, I was normal in all the ways that people expected me to be. And in that way, I felt like I really, first of all, betrayed myself. And in betraying myself, I also betrayed the person I love the most. And when you violate yourself in that way, it causes a great personal disruption and conflict inside yourself. I think it also really had a big impact in reducing my emotional intimacy with other friends and people that were a part of my life, because I couldn't tell them who I was. And if you leave out a major part of your authentic self, then you're just a fragment of a friend rather than really being able to be close to people in the way that I think most of us long for in the relationships we have with others. It also created distance with my parents, since if I was with somebody, I couldn't share the joy of that love, nor could I share the sorrow if I happened to break up. I was very alone and isolated in that way. So I think the biggest loss was really not ever telling my father, who died unexpectedly when I was 27. And I believe that he would have accepted me. And I never got the opportunity to really hear those words from him and feel that embrace that I believe he would have given. So I think the net result of all of those impacts, it shaped every part of my life, for the 15 years that I kept that secret.
My secret, well, I've got more than one secret, but the one that's associated with the book I wrote is about being a brain injury survivor. There's a huge stigma associated with that. But for instance, until recently, I was a professor of mathematics at Carnegie Mellon University. And I was really afraid. Well, first of all, I had trouble with sequential thinking. I was afraid that I would never be a mathematician again. And I had difficulties. I did go back to math. I did have to relearn things, but I was afraid to teach certain, more advanced classes, that kind of thing. I didn't want to be found out. I felt like an imposter. My colleagues never knew to what extent I was in trouble. Not necessarily from the point of view of the material, but I was thinking more slowly. I have a lot of issues with fatigue and stuff like that. I didn't want them to know that I was damaged goods. I was afraid to tell my students. I was afraid that they would think I'm an imposter. And what happened was I had to tell them to a degree because I ran into trouble, especially because of the fatigue. And I also have trouble processing sensory input. I ended up having to tell my students to stop them from chatting too much, that kind of thing. So I ended up telling them, and I was really afraid. And when I did, they were really interested. So I was completely taken aback. And it was great. After that, if they'd start chatting, I'd ask them not to. And it was the best response to please stop chatting I'd ever had from before the injury. With my colleagues, I had to say something because, again, I had to cut back on my teaching load. It took me a few years before I was able to do that, before I felt okay to do that. From my kids, I was afraid I was afraid to show weakness because I didn't want them to worry too much. So there is very much, you know, as I said, that was one of my biggest, most recent secret. No, second biggest, maybe third. I don't know.
There's a story.
Sorry, yeah. Now my book launched on Tuesday, so the secret's out. A secret I've been holding on to for 68 years. And because just like you other women were saying, it's all from, you know, fear of shame, humiliation, anxiety, but mostly fear. Fear what other people are gonna think of me. In 1959, after we were abducted, you know, we lived in all over the United States, like 7 different states, kind of running from the law, but I was only 8 years old, so I didn't realize that's what we were doing. But we lived in some really weird circumstances, and we lived on a beach, and we just thought it was camping, but it's because we had no home. We lived in a car. I mean, basically most of the time we were pretty homeless and lived in the back of a truck. So by the time my mother found us 4 years later, thank God, I'd already lived all over the United States, and it was really difficult. And I thought that if anybody knew that I lived this weird, strange childhood, that people would think I was carrying a lot of that with me, and maybe I wasn't, I just thought they would think badly of me. And once I graduated from med school and became a doctor, then it really became a secret, because I just didn't, it was too humiliating. But the truth is, after my beautiful mother, who died at almost 96 last year, and then I lost my brothers and my sister, and I'm the only one left, I decided to tell my story, because the truth is, now when I look at it, it really is an accomplishment. I shouldn't be ashamed of it. And as soon as I told my story about all the physical and mental abuse that I had been through in those 4 years, people understood. I mean, it was amazing to me how much they understood. And I totally now feel like I can live my true self, because that's a big part of my life. And it was just the biggest, darkest secret. And the crazy thing is, we hold this secret, and when you let it out, you realize, why didn't I do this 20 years ago? You know? So I'm extremely grateful to be living on this beautiful island of Maui. And so telling my secret really set me free.
I feel like I've done what I was meant to do with my memoir writing guide, which was to help people tell their stories, because I think everybody's story is really important. And like all writers, I'm sure we feel like we have something to say. And I think about the books that impacted me. And when I was in law school, I remember a woman saying to me, you know, Ann, you need to write, you have something to teach us, and which is a nice thing for people to say to you. And I feel like the story, well, it's not a story, it's truth, that I need to write, I'm not writing because I'm afraid, well, shamed, not afraid, shamed of the truth. I'm ashamed that I was never as successful in the world of work that I should have been. I'm ashamed that I was fat. I was 150 pounds more than I am now. I'm ashamed that I wasted maybe isn't the right word, but I spent so much of my life in despair and anger and depression. I'm ashamed that it took me so long to tell my abusive father to go fuck himself, and that he still affects me even though he's been dead for years. So I think that for me, the secrets are the shame that's keeping me from writing the book I've meant to write and telling the story I meant to tell. And I thank you, Melissa, looking at you in the corner, for allowing me the opportunity to admit that, because I can't move forward and do what I need to do until I'm able to say, you know, this is the person I am. I tend to write happy little stories, and I'm a pretty happy person now. And I kind of say, if I can learn to be happy, anybody can learn to be happy, because of the years of terrible, terrible, overwhelming depression. I would sit on the edge of my bed and weep and pray to die at night. And that I came through that is the story to tell, but I can't tell it until I'm honest about all this other stuff. So.
Well, my book is all about secrets. I don't know if any of you do this, but every year I write a family newsletter at Christmas time. And of course, it's always, you know, emphasizing the positive things that have happened. If anything negative happened, like a tree fell on the house or whatever, I highlight it with humor. But well, what I discovered was, I didn't even think about it, but when my mother died, I found all the letters that I had written, and I thought, you know, a lot of people I never see, they don't have a clue what's going on with us. And that's what prompted me to write the book. My daughter was has been mentally unstable for a lifetime. She was addicted to heroin. Then through a series of years, terrible things happened. I ended up raising my grandchildren. But I think I did it. I didn't tell a lot of this, and I didn't tell about my own depression. Depression runs in the family. I didn't talk about my dad being an alcoholic and being bipolar, because I come from a time period when you kept those things to yourself, because if you told about your kids doing things that are not accepted in society, it was a reflection on you as a mother. I was date raped when I was 19. I didn't tell anybody until I was in my 40s. And so I didn't tell anybody about mental illness, because unfortunately we all know that a lot of people think that mental illness is something that you have control over. So that's what the whole book is about. It focuses on the letter first, and then really tells what really happened.
Wow. You know, it just goes to show we all have secrets, right, Patty? I mean, it's crazy. And we hold them all in, and we hold them in thinking, you know, judgment, 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 judgment. And the reality is, once you tell it, you realize everybody empathizes because everybody's got secrets. And not only do we not judge you, we just want to hug you, you know, and say, you know, we love you and we could totally feel for you, you know. So that's the beauty of waiting so long. There are people out there that support us, and we're just so afraid.
I remember when I was growing up, there was a girl, and I grew up, you know, Leave It to Beaver, really, you know, could have been my, you know, the way it looked. And there was a girl in the neighborhood who used to want to play wildly inappropriate games that were highly sexualized, even though she was a kid. She was like 5 or 6. And in retrospect, when I look back, and the games always made me uncomfortable, that she must have been being abused. She must have been being abused, because it would have been so inappropriate. And my mom found her brother doing something to me when I was still a toddler. But I remember saying years later, oh, Mr. So-and-so, or somebody in that house was abusing the children. And mom's like, oh, no, not Mr. So-and-so. He was a nice man. And that was, we didn't talk about it. We hid it. You know, we couldn't believe it. You know, I'm glad that we can share things, because no child should be abused. I sometimes wonder what happened to her, the poor girl.
I think that women of my generation, I'm 72, grew up in the 50s and 60s, we were more prone to secrecy than our own children and grandchildren are, probably because there are so many things in society were not accepted, especially from females. You know, my mother put up with my abusive dad for 19 years. I just, you know, I look at that today and think, how the hell did she do that? But it was part of how we grew up, especially if we were in ultra religious families. And my dad's family was all very fundamental. I kind of like Facebook and all those other silly social media sites because people tell things that we wouldn't have done.
The Me Too movement.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So here's another question. How many of us have had a Me Too type situation?
Yeah.
I think most of us, yeah.
Well, it's varying levels. I mean, bosses, every boss I've had was a creep. Does that count?
Right.
If it wasn't overt, it was hinted at.
Yeah. Well, I was on a job interview where the principal told me, that was interviewing me, told me, well, you're mighty cute, but I want to hire a man.
Wow.
Well, you know, that wouldn't fly today.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, I looked back and thought, you know, I'm glad I didn't work for him.
My first year in practice, I was a young doctor, and a male patient, it was, I mean, literally the first couple of months, on the way out, and I'm wearing my white coat and we've just got done talking. I'm walking in front of him and he's on the way out. He slapped me on my ass.
Wow.
And this is like 1982.
Wow.
I tell you, I turned around and grabbed, because I'd been weightlifting, and when I was younger, I was a total bodybuilder, and I grabbed him by his arm, and these are my exact words, "You fucking do that again and I'll break it." And that was it. Of course, he never came back, and that was, but I was just enough, you know, just enough.
I remember, you know, I remember you talked about your woman doctor and your woman lawyer and your woman accountant, not my doctor, my lawyer, my accountant. Yeah.
I was going back to the idea of why we keep secrets. And I think, you know, as human beings, we're really wired with a desire to belong. And that whole issue of being a part of something and feeling like you belong somewhere is critical to our health and well-being. And the potential loss of that, if it's through shame, fear, humiliation, I think that's such a huge factor in why people keep secrets, because it is also part of their staying alive from the perspective of being connected socially and feeling loved, not knowing what real life is versus, you know, kind of tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you're cut from the herd, you can't survive.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a part of my growing up. Abuse takes a lot of forms. And there's some of you, I hear you speaking, I hear a form of religious abuse. And for me, my stepmother, my secret was that I was defective. And nothing that I could ever do was ever good enough. If I made 98, I could have made 100. If I did 15 of these, well, why didn't you do 20? Why didn't you just do 16? Why didn't you do one more? I mean, nothing was ever right. And there were some other things that were more, she made me eat things that I couldn't stand, and she would force me not to open my mouth, and the bile would begin to come up, and I would be throwing up inside myself, and I had to swallow it, all of it. So all my life I've been swallowing things, and things that were not good for me. But the secret that I was defective, I felt that my entire life. And no matter what I did, or no matter what successes I had, I never trusted it, and I never felt it. I never believed it. And I still don't, I have to say. I'm
amazing. You're still carrying it with you.
carrying it.
I mean, so am I, Diane. So, I mean, I hear you and I get it.
I don't know how we get out, and I'm a therapist. And you know, I've been through all the therapy myself. I know I know the healing of people being able to release and trust someone who is trustworthy with those secrets. I know the difference it makes. But in the long run, I still don't trust my success. I still don't trust that I've done enough
But it has made you a better therapist, I'm sure. It's like when you feel other people's pain, you're not just wondering, I wonder what that feels like. I mean, there wasn't ever anything a patient could tell me that I would go, oh my God. I mean, because been there, done that. So I think it's actually made me a better doctor.
I had the same experience as a school counselor because there were so many parents that came to me, they were ashamed, they were fearful. And I said, oh, that's nothing. You ought to hear what happened to me. And you could see them, they would just visibly relax.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the whole thing with secrets, when I first wrote the book, I wasn't doing it. It wasn't to do with revealing a secret. It was to do with trying to understand what was going on. And then I figured out that other people need to understand, and I wanted to reach a broader audience. But as I wrote, I became more aware of the importance of opening myself up, for instance, to my colleagues, to my students, to friends, to acquaintances. But also through writing about it, I became more aware of issues with my mental health. And I was writing about a bout of suicide ideation I went through. And again, at the time I thought, oh, well, you know, I don't have it in me. These are just thoughts of suicide. But as I wrote, I realized that it was more than that. And I ended up going on meds and all that kind of thing. But again, through that whole thing, one thing I found out was, when you talk about these things, your quote unquote weaknesses become strengths because you make better connections with people. You find yourself in a community of people who, as you said, don't judge you. And as Carol said, it's about you form your own community. You don't, you know, you are part of something. One thing I learned through this whole brain injury thing is I finally woke up to my sexuality. I mean, secrets seem to, when you open up, other things crowd in. There's more, you learn more about yourself. I don't know, overall, I think when you're ready to open up, it opens up a whole world for you.
My experience is when you come forward and share something in an authentic way around something that matters, it really touches people and it resonates with people. I think, I know myself, I long for those more intimate and authentic connections in my life. And when I'm willing to be open in that way, it has often been the case that other people then are open to share, even if their secret is different or something they've had a difficult time with. And I think we actually honor each other by being real, and that it has a rippling effect that other people then have an opportunity to be real with us.
Do you think you have to choose your audience, Carol? I mean, or maybe everybody, because I've kept journals for forever, and I'm now putting them into my computer for a project I'm working on. And I find that there's instances where I shared something with somebody, and I wrote this down, you know, at the time, and was just attacked for whatever reason. So do you feel like you have to choose your audience?
Yeah, I go by a quote that I think it was Alice Walker said, "Don't give your heart to people who eat hearts."
Ooh,
and I thought that was really good advice.
Yeah.
So that I think certainly in coming out, I was very judicious in who I told that to begin with, and looked for really trusted sources in sharing that information. So I think, yes, it's, you know, I look around and I try to be discerning about that. But going from not even being able to tell myself to writing a book about it, you know, was a pretty big leap. And, you know, not everybody in the world is empathetic and understanding, but I believe many more people are than we think will be. And so we underestimate the human race in that way. And we project out fear that may not be coming toward us. or judgment that really isn't there. And I think, I understand, certainly I didn't tell anybody for a long time, for 15 years, as a matter of fact. So certainly I was being very discerning about who could I trust this information with. Ultimately, I've not had one bad experience with somebody I chose to tell that information to. I knew that finally I had arrived in myself with a sense of comfort when I worked as a consultant. I was working down at a paper mill in South Carolina, and I was working with a colleague who knew that I was gay. And one day he brought me into the office and he said, I think you're really going to be upset that Barry, the HR manager, is spreading rumors that you're gay. And I thought, well, those are true rumors. I am gay and I can't change what anybody thinks about that. And I said, oh my God, I was so worried. I thought it was about my work, rather than about being gay. And I knew then that I had arrived at some place that I really had come to love myself and accept that and trust that I could have my own relationships with people and they would judge me for myself rather than what Barry was trying to do and influencing a negative perspective about me. But definitely, I would say, especially when you're just beginning to think about sharing your work, to start with people that you really trust and share some of those stories with those people and see how that goes. You build kind of a muscle around it, I think. I know in writing my memoir, I came away with a real sense of pride of who I was by having the courage to live my own life as I saw fit rather than to live somebody else's life. And I think in telling those stories, I think Veronica also mentioned that she came away feeling like, wow, that was a remarkable thing that she lived through rather than something to be ashamed of. So I think it's a transformative act, really, to do the writing itself.
Well, I'm struck by the word authenticity, Carol, and the authentic, and whether you've used that word or not, all of you have touched on it, that when we do have someone to trust and when we are able to be transparent, the feeling of authenticity is one of the most healing and wonderful experiences there is. This is me. I'm me, and it's okay. It's not only okay, it's good. Here
It's
I am.
almost euphoric, It
Yes.
really is. It's almost euphoric. It's like, I don't have to hide anymore.
Right.
Well, it really releases a heavy burden that you don't even realize how heavy that burden is until you set it down and really free yourself from that.
That transitions us to the last question, which is, can you tell us about the skills and tools that you used to come through the challenges you faced?
Well, for me, the main tool was writing. I started writing and it just all broke through. Between that and just maturity were the two tools that got me to the point that I was able to talk about it and then write about it. And now I'm one free woman.
Veronica, I totally agree that writing is one of the primary things. And I'm not just talking about the books that we have written. I started off journaling, and I would journal extensively every day just to get some of these feelings expressed. And so some of these shelves of books are shelves of journals. I never look back at them, but they served their purpose at the time. And this morning, I discovered a little Q&A book that asks you questions, and it goes for like 5 years. And I started writing, I thought, okay, I'll just write that. Well, I started going through the days, and it got deeper and deeper and deeper with me until I was telling the truth.
The most important thing that helped me come through was telling the truth, first to myself, and then to some trusted friends, and then ultimately to a much wider audience. Whoever said the truth will set you free, there's a visceral thing that happens when you tell the truth and live your authentic life. And I think writing it then also gives you a chance to reflect on it and see a courageous human being that went through all of these things in order to find that truth and to live it.
Yes.
I'm finding, I don't know that I have any tools. I'm finding COVID really difficult. My mother and brother were both hospitalized, and I thought I was going to be planning 2 funerals. Fortunately, they're home. But I think for me, it's not saying I'm too old, I'm set in my ways. You know, I'm 65 years old, and the tendency is to go, oh, well, I'm too old to do this, but that's not true. You know, every day is a new day. It's a new day to start again, to reinvent myself, to try again. I'm not doing that great. I admit it. I'm kind of pouting and eating too much, but I'm trying. So I guess maybe that's my tool, is to get up every day and do your best. And if it's writing or going for a walk or, you know, not eating large boxes of ding dongs, you know, then just try your best. I don't eat ding dongs, they're too sweet, but you know.
In terms of tools, I think it's mostly, I mean, my community more than anything else, and then eventually writing. But I mean, I couldn't really hide, for instance, the brain injury, I couldn't hide it, people who witnessed some of the stuff that was going on. But I mean, for instance, it's very common among brain injury survivors to hide things so as not to be judged. I mean, I had issues with my balance, and I'd lean nonchalantly against a wall, you know, things like that. So that, you know, so I had no choice, but I did broaden. At first, it was only my family and close friends, and then it grew, my circle of people who knew. But then I reached a point where I wasn't constantly surrounded by people who knew my story. So I had to actually tell strangers, and that was a huge step for me. But I mean, for instance, the suicide type stuff, it was through writing that it finally brought it home to me what was going on. But the real freedom came was when I realized, as I said earlier, you turn by exposing your weaknesses, you turn them into strengths. As Carol said, basically, you connect better with people. They open up to you. You form stronger bonds, and that's what happened with my students. That you know, at first it was I spoke to them to start from chatting, but it turned into much more than that. Once I became open about my brain injury, then I talked about mental health. Then they were open to me about their issues. When I spoke about suicide, students actually came to me to talk about these kind of issues to me, which is, given that students don't have that support system that they'd have at home, you know, people refer to me as Mama Deb. So it's about, as you all said, writing, but it's also very much about the community, about people.
Well, I think writing's important, and I've done it all my life, but I also think self-reflection is very important, because we all get so busy. And I think it's really important to take time every day to be alone and to think about life and yourself and your role in it.
Thank you for sharing, everyone. To all our viewers, don't forget to subscribe and also check out the panelists' YouTube channels linked in the description below. You can't buy love like that, but my brain had other ideas. Have you seen these children? Writing Your Life, The Abolitionist's Daughter, and another cheesy family newsletter are available on Amazon, links below, as well as links to each panelist's website. Thank you for being with us today.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.